What we say.
Yeah.
People don't realize that.
Testing, one.
I never thought of that.
Testing, one.
Of course, no one ever said anything bad, of course.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Maybe they wouldn't.
All right.
Just maybe personal things.
Yeah, they didn't say anything bad, but we just that, they might have no about things.
You know, you're on nationwide TV. Like, oops.
I was like, yeah. Tommy's gone. He's here. He's home now. I don't.
Oh, Pat.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm doing good. How you doing?
Oh, my brother's doing really well.
The typewriter?
Do
My
what?
brother Dale's doing really good.
Well, good.
And he's quit smoking for now.
Well, good.
15 days, the other day, he says, no smoking. He says, you
Glad to hear that.
Yeah. But he smoked all his life, and so yeah, I stopped giving him the lectures. But something like this, yeah.
How's Tommy doing?
Good. He's here.
He's out there in the auditorium.
Yeah.
Well, he was sick Sunday, so
Yeah,
I was inquiring.
appreciate that, yeah.
How's Stephanie doing?
She's not feeling well tonight. In fact, she stayed home from work yesterday and today.
Oh, she got what Chris had?
Well, no, he had an upset stomach and everything. He probably had some type of flu virus. She had just a head cold.
Ooh, those are no fun.
I've been battling with a head cold myself. So.
Why you sound like you're talking with it?
We'll just quit fighting it, leave it somewhere and walk off from it.
Yeah.
You know, I've been trying to do that. I've stayed inside the house. I didn't even take my Christmas decorations down like yesterday like I was going to, just because I didn't want to get out in the wind.
Well, it's going to be too cold now until March.
See, some people still have their Christmas lights out, lit and everything. It's really pretty.
Yeah, it is.
And that's what their electric bill is, though.
Yeah. Well. What chapter are we on?
40.
40?
I think, yeah, this is what I have my star on. I know we did some, because I remember John asking Dale how long he was in prison until those two people came that Chief Cupbearer and Chief Baker went to the prison.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I got the right one. I mean, I studied chapter 40. Along with a few other chapters I didn't need to study, but if they were interesting.
I think we should be starting on verse 4, I believe.
Verse 4?
Because verse 3 was, they put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's going the other way. Are we supposed to be going that way?
Okay,
Some of our classmates are headed that direction.
Well, it's good to see you back, Pat.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back. I was doing enough of that coughing for every one of us, and I didn't want to come back and you to share it.
We appreciate that.
I know.
Some people will come no matter what. Says, yeah, give us all the cold. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
this coughing was just,
Yeah.
I'm still a little congested from it, but the cough is under control.
The coat will make you feel better.
And it was good. Over a week I was under.
I think I'd rather have like a stomach bug that's over a few days than the cold that's lasts forever.
Yeah, that's.
Well, either one's bad, but
I
if I
was
had
just coughing and just no energy and just hadn't rested out.
Just wearing that beautiful coat of hers.
Thank you.
It's warm, huh?
It does. It's
Yes,
too
I-
warm for this class.
She knows I love it. I don't want it. I want one just like it. I'm not jealous or envious at all. I just want one just like it.
You'd probably be like me and I hardly ever wear it.
And it's, hey, that one Sunday when it was so cold, the long, your
Oh, yeah,
full length one would have worked then.
Did
But
I?
and I would've been drooling when I saw it. It's so
You're
gorgeous.
so sweet.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hey, Miss Pat.
Hi.
Two Pats.
Pat,
You
Pat.
can stutter.
Hey,
You
yeah.
better speak to both of us, or don't speak to just one of us.
Pat, Pat.
Room for your foot. Did you?
I got arthritis in this thumb,
Oh, yeah?
and I do a certain thing, it pulls and it smarts.
Yes, I'm gonna put my glasses on. I feel like I'm rode hard to put away wet. Never had that feeling?
Probably.
When I felt that way, I took a bath.
Yeah, I didn't get a nap.
That sticky horse, you know, the hair sticks
It's been a
together.
while since I've.
And I'll get a nap, I'm really grumpy.
Right?
So I had a nap, so I shouldn't be grumpy now.
Okay, let's see what's.
Well, the clock on the wall says it's time to begin.
Clock goes by.
We were short a couple of people. John will be in here in a minute. And I'm supposing there's Debbie. Ron should be here in a minute. Lawrence is not well tonight. Stephanie's not well tonight, so they won't be here. So, but we are going to begin chapter 40 tonight. And since John was asking so many questions last week, I have answers for him.
So, yeah.
There he is.
There he is. Speaking of the devil.
Yeah, I can't start till he comes in because I have all the answers that he keeps asking these questions about.
You should
Well,
say, thinking,
Did you get the
thinking of the
answer?
angel.
I said I have all the answers that you keep asking questions about.
All the right answers.
Well, you can tell, you can decide that, you know. That's the one thing
Well,
God
you
gave
don't
us
like
all,
to make up
the
your
ability to
own.
make choices.
Yeah.
Well, Sharon told me not to ask you no questions you don't know the answer to, so I'll have to ask you if you know the answer before I ask them.
Yeah.
Well, if I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you, I'll look it up and I'll get you an answer.
Oh,
This is
So we are gonna,
yeah, we're back in business.
well, I hope
Spin that a
so.
little bit, there you go. Well, that was enough.
Can you see it all right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now I already got it recorded.
Yeah, you got done all of it.
Yeah, because I wanted to be able to work this up here. If you didn't mess it up, I can still work it. I can still work it, hey,
I don't
fantastic.
mess nothing
Okay, so we're gonna begin chapter 40 tonight.
Hey,
And,
come on in.
up.
Hello, Karen. Last week, John asked a couple of questions, so I did a little research and everything. And I'll just read the information, then I'll give you a couple of sheets. First off, when you look at the timeline of Joseph's story, there's lots of information about Joseph in Genesis, particularly chapter 40 and chapter 41, which will begin chapter 40 tonight. For instance, we know this, that he was 17 when he was sold into Egypt, right? We also know that he was 30 when he was made overseer. Now somebody might say, well, how do you know that? Well, I went to Genesis chapter 41, verse 46. There. Thirdly, he was 39 when his brothers first came to Egypt, second year of famine, or 9 years after being made overseer. And fourthly, he was probably 41 or so when the brothers came a second time and Jacob comes to Egypt. And we know that he was 110 years old when he died. Okay, that takes care of all of Genesis chapter 50. So, how long was Joseph in Potiphar's house? And how long was he in prison? I'll give you the answer. You may not like it, but here's the answer. Genesis chapter 41, verse 46 tells us that Joseph was 30 years old when he was made overseer to the king of Egypt. And since he was 17 when he was sold in Egypt, that means that he spent 13 years total in Potiphar's house and in prison. So he lived in Potiphar's house somewhere around 11 years or less and was in prison 2 or more years. We know Joseph was in prison at least 2 years because chapter 40 tells us about the servants of the king whose dreams Joseph interpreted. The first verse of chapter 41 tells us that 2 years passed after that event before the king had his dreams that Joseph was called to interpret. So that's the best that we can give you. Somewhere between 2, maybe 2.5 years he was in prison. Somewhere between 11 or just a little bit less, he was in Potiphar's house. Okay?
You don't know how long he was in there since he got to prison and he gave the 2 prisoners their dream interpretation, right?
Right. We just know it was a total of 13 years after he was made overseer to the king of Egypt. Okay? So, 17 years and then 30 years, there's 13 years there. And that was Potiphar's house and the prison. Okay? And I made that little sheet for you. So Isaac, I'll let you pass that down.
Let me write all that down. I'm glad I didn't.
And then I made another sheet for you. Put lots of color in this one so you'll like this one. But this is a comparison of Jesus and Joseph. So you get a little bit of what we're looking at in the book of Genesis. And I didn't make a slide of this, I just made the sheet. Billy not feeling well tonight?
No, she's not good.
Yeah, I put lots of color in this one for you. Well,
Got away from me. This color can be clear. Yellow, blue.
so there you go. So that brings us to chapter 40. And Jensen, you want to lead us in prayer tonight?
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all your many wonderful blessings. We thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be able to gather here this evening to study another portion of your word. Please be with us and help us have open minds and open hearts as we go through this study. Be with those who are not feeling well this evening also, that they recover quickly from their ailments and are able to rejoin us again in studying and worshiping you. Forgive us of our sins as we repent of them. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, in your handout now, it's page 102. And the title that Victor Eskew gave for this chapter is Joseph the Interpreter of Dreams. And I did use that title. But he also suggested that it could be 2 more dreams. He suggested it could be a butler and a baker, but no candlestick maker. He suggested it could be a chance meeting. Those are the things. Now, Genesis chapter 40, verse 8 is the key verse that he chose. And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpretation of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me then, I pray you. And the point that he's making here is this verse reveals that the butler and baker had dreamed dreams. They, however, could not interpret them. Joseph acknowledged that God was the interpreter of dreams, and he could interpret these dreams through his faithful servant, Joseph. And so that's, excuse me. So, with that in mind, let's go to Genesis chapter 40. And verses 1 through 3, and I guess Ron may not be feeling well tonight either.
No, they're both
sick. So you have a long list tonight, Jensen, because you have Stephanie, Florence, Ron, Tila,
Billy.
Billy, yeah. And Sharon. So, you might as well just list the people that are here. All right, let's read verses 1 through 3. Isaac, you want to begin tonight?
It came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined.
Okay. You know, I'm glad you're feeling better, Pat, that you're able to be here tonight, because you had a rough time of it as well. All right, so, as I have up here, those who offend the king will suffer his wrath and will be punished. We cannot know precisely how much time Joseph spent in prison. We've already discussed that, but because we do not know how long he served in Potiphar's house, all right? So keep that in mind. But we do know that Joseph was sold to Egypt when he was about 17. We know that by going to Genesis chapter 37 and verse 2. We'll not take time to read that tonight, but and we know that he rose to rule over Egypt 13 years later at age 30, and that was chapter 41, verse 46 that I read to you a while ago. Okay? So 2 years between the end of this chapter and the beginning of the next, indicating that Joseph was 28 years old at this time. The butler and baker were in charge of Pharaoh's food and in charge of the drink. All right? Both would have been valued officials. There's a reason for this. There's still that custom today that the kings and princes in those countries and everything still have someone to taste their food ahead of time to make sure it hadn't been poisoned. And so these individuals were very much very valued as individuals. There were also, of necessity though, trustworthy employees. Both had close access to the Pharaoh, and both could play a sinister role in a conspiracy against him. So that's why you see that phrase that Isaac read there, offended their lord, the king of Egypt. This terminology implies actual guilt. In contrast with Joseph's imprisonment, they were not just thrown in prison on a royal whim. There was that actual guilt there. The king was very angry, very wroth with them, and he was going to punish them. So they were sent to the royal prison to await a sentence from the Pharaoh, where Joseph also was confined and now working as the steward of the prison. Look at Genesis 39 and verses 21 through 23. John, you want to read that?
But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed Joseph's hand to all prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did, there he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, and the Lord made it prosper.
Okay. So you see, Joseph here was put into a place of authority here. He was a steward in this prison at this time. All right, look at verse 40 then. Genesis chapter 40 and verse 4. Let's see, why don't you go ahead, Debbie, read verses 4 and 5 for me.
And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. Okay,
now in your handout, this would be capital letter C on page 102 and capital letter D and E. Okay? So, leadership involves service to others, as I have up here. The captain of the guard, who do you think that might be?
Could it possibly be the one who had to?
Probably pretty close to Potiphar.
Potiphar, yeah. I
Yeah.
couldn't think of his name.
Could very well be Potiphar. And let's go to Genesis 37 and verse 36. Pat, you want to read that?
37 and 36?
Yes, please.
Meanwhile, the Mennonites sold him into Egypt to Potiphar. Potiphar's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. Yeah, it's him.
Okay. And also chapter 39 and verse 1, which...
Mine says captain of the guard, so that you would say that's the one that's guarding the prison?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, same thing, captain of the guard, and that's what I had in my notes here.
That is the guard of Pharaoh's palace.
Well, he very well could have been that guard too. He was captain of the guard, period. And you look at 39 and verse 1 where it says, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. So Potiphar was the captain of the guard of the Pharaoh as well. Okay? So that's a good question. All right, so because he knew Joseph's work, and Potiphar certainly did, you know, we talked about this last week as to why Potiphar might not have put Joseph to death. He knew Joseph could be trusted to be with these two important prisoners. Note that Joseph's position is not to watch over them, though, but his position is to serve them. And so we see another downward turn in Joseph's path. All right? So from favorite in the family, had that coat of many colors, his dad loved him, he was the favored son, he was sold into slavery. Then he rose up from the master of Potiphar's house. Then he went to prison. Now, having risen to authority in the prison, he finds himself serving the prisoners. This raises the question why these prisoners would get a servant. And the answer is that these are no ordinary prisoners. Yes,
I would
Isaac.
say that's no ordinary prison either.
That's true. It's no ordinary prison.
It's not a dungeon with
Not to jump ahead.
Yeah. Cal?
And I think Potiphar was a very wise man. He's aware of palace politics and how things work. And these guys are in jail, if you will. But he's going to make sure that they're taken care of because they are high officials. And if perchance they end up being innocent, having taken care of them, he has an ally, somebody that will also be watching his back. But if they're guilty, they'll be dead, and it's no problem. He has
That's
lost
true.
the fight.
That's true.
So I think he's a wise person. The reason he put Joseph there, I think, is he doesn't believe what's going on, but he has a public image he has to protect.
That's very true. Now, I want you to think about this for just a moment, too, along with what Cal said. But in every age, prisoners of high rank are not treated like other prisoners. You see that today, don't you?
Yes, we do.
You see people getting by with stuff today that you and I would go to prison for because they're of a higher rank. So this is
custody.
yeah. So these two prisoners had occupied important places in the court. And Pharaoh may yet pardon them, as Cal suggested, because they haven't been found guilty yet. So it makes perfect sense then that they should be singled out for special treatment in prison. And so it is that Joseph is their servant. All right, look at Genesis chapter 40 and verse 5. Debbie read that here, so let's just continue on then. And that is capital letter E on page 102 of your handout. So what we saw here in verse 5 is both the butler and the baker dream a dream. Again, the question is, was this coincidence or was it God's providence at work?
God.
Has to be providence.
It's both. It's all of it.
Yeah. But unlike others who dreamed knowing that God was speaking to them, these dreams were not clear messages from God, and their meanings were lost on these men. The dreams had something in common, though. They happened on the same night, and each had a meaning, but they were also distinct. They were different dreams, each with a unique meaning. As with Joseph's dreams, they are stated at the outset to indicate that God is in charge throughout what will later happen in no mere coincidence. So these are some unique dreams that these two men did not understand. Okay? So let's look at verses 6 through 8. Jensen, read that for us.
And Joseph came in to them in the morning and looked at them, and saw they were sad. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his Lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they said to him, "We each had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it." So Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please."
Okay. This is your hand in your handout, capital letter F and G and H are the three outlines, and that's 102 and 103 in your handout, okay? So, knowing a person's inside allows us to effectively communicate with them. Perplexed and terrified, both because they perceived the dream was extraordinary and that it was sent from God, and because they did not understand the meaning of it. Verse 7 again, look at that. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his Lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" This is a beautiful specimen of that attentive tenderness and sympathy by means of which God gave Joseph. He gave him this favor with everyone whom he approached. And you'll see that as time goes on in Genesis, all the way through the 50th chapter.
I find it interesting that they're asking him, he's asking them, "Why are you so sad?" "Well, you're in prison." Well, I would understand. I would automatically be sad, but that shows me that it's not really your typical prison. That's what I would.
And you can always also assume that, based on Joseph asking this question, that this is something new, that they hadn't shown this kind of sadness beforehand. After all, he's been serving them. And so he comes to them now, he sees that they're sad. So the prisoners could not consult the diviners in whom they placed confidence, and this may have added to their anxiety. They couldn't consult them because they were in prison, obviously. Joseph's relevant questions suggest that he had before discussed with them concerning the true God. And that's certainly a possibility, Joseph being a man of God, a faithful man, and that he endeavored to draw them off from those lying vanities to his worship and service. Keep in mind, now these people were idolater worshipers, okay? So it also precluded giving them the honor of the interpretation. Joseph's request then is a bold one. We cannot know exactly what motivated him, though various suggestions have been made. Most commonly, the suggestion is it's seen as an act of faith, though some have seen it as a mere presumptuousness when he asked them to tell him of the dreams.
Curiosity.
Curiosity, yeah.
Yeah, well, tell me about it. Now, observing that the interpretation belongs to God, okay, he believed that. He's had these dreams before.
Yes.
Okay? So he knows about dreams, and now he says, "Tell me your dream."
Yeah.
I'm not promising I'm going to give you anything on it, but tell me. I'm interested in dreams.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I think it's a natural response.
It is.
If somebody says,
like you say,
"Boy, I had a bad dream last night." "Oh yeah, what happened?"
I don't remember.
And like you say, most likely it was curiosity at this point. All right, good point. Now let's look at verses.
I really did have a bad memory, so coming out an interesting tone.
Yeah. Let's look at verses 9 through 13 then. Donna, you want to read that for me, please?
So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches, and as it was budding, its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer."
Okay. So, as I have up there, some dreams can speak of favorable consequences. And in your handout, this is on page 103 in capital letter I. So they're sharing the dreams with Joseph, obviously, and the cupbearer's dream was of a grapevine quickly going through the process of growing and bearing fruit. The cupbearer held Pharaoh's cup in his hand, and which he filled with the juice and gave to Pharaoh. So Joseph tells the cupbearer that he will have his job restored to him. Very positive. His head will be lifted up, which contrasts verse 7. Go back and look at verse 7. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his Lord's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" So after the interpretation of this dream, you can see that his sadness is going to disappear. The number 3 is prominent in the dream because 3 actions follow the 3 branches: budded, blossomed, and ripened. So also Pharaoh's cup is mentioned 3 times and is followed by 3 actions. He took it, he pressed, and he placed the cup. The recurrence of the number 3 confirms the dream and the 3 days that was mentioned here. Okay? Any comments on through verse 13? Yes, Cal?
Yeah. The use of numbers all through the Bible is remarkable.
Yes.
Now, when we're making a point of something, we usually try to reinforce it with 3 different looks at it. So it's something we still do today. But the use of numbers, especially when you're reading in Daniel and the other prophetic literature and then the Revelation, so we don't understand how they use those numbers or the way they look at things through numbers. So there's different. The numbers of letters and different names mean something
Yes.
to those people,
Yes.
whereas they don't to us.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's really significant that you get all these 3s in about 3 or 4 verses, right? Here, you're loaded up with all these different sequences of 3. But now, here's the thing. Joseph sees the significance. He's familiar with dreams. He's familiar with the interpretation of dreams.
Yeah.
He's familiar with the numbers and everything else. And to him, it makes perfect sense.
Sure. Because of the fact that the dreams that he's had has all been, or has all come to truth.
Yeah.
And so he, like you say, he's very familiar with the dreams. And so he can tell this cupbearer that, hey, your job's going to be restored. You can smile again. You can rejoice. Yes, John.
All of Joseph's dreams haven't come true yet.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. Yeah, but
Yeah.
but many of his dreams have come true.
That's safe to say.
Well, the ones that the brothers was mad about haven't come true yet.
That's true.
And I think that's probably where it started
he's
sparking his interest in dreams, and then, hey, maybe there's something here.
Yeah.
Because and obviously his aid came to the one about his brothers and all that, but I'm sure that probably sparked his interest when dreams, huh? Okay, well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Pat, you had a comment?
No.
Okay. All right, look at verses 14 and 15 then. Let's see. Cal?
What's that?
Verses 14 and 15?
14, 15.
Yes, please.
Joseph speaking there to the cupbearer, "Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon."
All right, so as I have up there, when we are innocent, there is always a desire for justification. And in your handout is page 103, cap letter K. Okay? So although the traditional interpretation that Joseph is asking for a favor in turn for interpretation is still standard. Okay? The thought is that Joseph is not asking the cupbearer for immediate assistance, but telling him that a time will come when he does have the opportunity to remember him. Okay? So Joseph then would not be the last prisoner to claim innocence. If a prisoner lays claims to liberation, he must offer some explanation for his right to be liberated. In addition to the favor he did for the cupbearer, Joseph tells him that he has been wrongly imprisoned. Okay, so that's where it is right now, but nothing is going to go further at this point. So now we have the interpretation of another dream.
Now, can we talk
Yes.
about
Yes.
palace politics again?
Yeah.
guess what? Everybody knows Potiphar. They probably know about his wife.
Yeah.
He probably knows the truth too, right?
And that's why
doesn't,
he didn't kill.
Suspects it, right?
Yeah.
So when he tells him this, it should resonate with this cupbearer. He was in there because he was falsely accused.
Yeah.
He says, I'm just like you. I was put in here under false charges. Please remember me.
Yeah, good point. Because certainly, I mean, you have to know that the cupbearer and the bread maker knew the history of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
They knew why he was put in prison. And like you say, they probably knew Potiphar's wife. This was not the first attempt that she had made at trying to seduce someone, much like our teachers today. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. But I happened to see on the news today a 40-year-old. This is her second offense. She was put on probation, couldn't stay away, so turns out she'd been seducing, and she was a substitute teacher, seducing a number of 16 and 17-year-old boys. So she'll go to jail for a long time. And this is what Potiphar's wife was probably doing. Because Potiphar was doing his duty, probably wasn't providing much as a husband, and so she was looking other places for affection, which did not make it right. But Joseph was falsely accused here in this case, and this is what he's saying to the cupbearer. So we look at verses 16 through 19. Karen, you want to read that?
Yeah. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, 3 baskets of white bread were on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked food for Pharaoh. And the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within yet 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee.
This dream's completely opposite from the cupbearer, huh? This does not give the bread maker the opportunity to smile. He's going to be more sad now. So as I have up there, the interpretation of some dreams reveals very negative consequences, and that's what this one is revealing. And in your handout, this would be capital letter M on page 103. So the chief baker, first off, he's excited. And he just heard the results of the dream of the cupbearer. And so, hey, this is going to be good. You know, things are going to work out for me as well. So in his dream, he carried the baskets of baked goods on his head to the Pharaoh, but the birds ate out of the baskets. As bizarre this may seem, it would have been quite sensible to them. And the reason being is because Egyptian men regularly carried baskets on their head. Okay? So, as a baker, he would have often carried baskets on his head with baked goods. In that process, of course, though, the birds would try to eat from the baskets, which would be a normal procedure. So this part of the dream, he certainly can accept that. The idea that is being painted here, though, is that he would not try to preserve the king's bread. However, does not bode well for the baker. The fulfillment of this dream will also come in 3 days, just as it did with the cupbearer. So, at this point, though, the baker's head will be lifted up. However, all similarities end here. While the cupbearer's position was to be restored, the baker was to be decapitated.
And hung on a tree.
Do what?
I said, and hung on a tree.
And hung on a tree, yes. Decapitations were sometimes followed by impalement on a stake, where birds of prey and carrion eaters would dispose of the carcass. Now, I don't know if he was impaled other than just hung on a tree, but he very well could have been impaled because the impalement of a corpse was commonly practiced and was considered frightfully ignominious. Let's look at a couple of examples. I did put some up there. Deuteronomy 21 verses 22 and 23. Isaac, you want to read that?
If a man has committed a sin deserving of death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day, so that you do not defile the land which the Lord your God has given you and an inheritance. For he who is hanged is accused of God, accursed of God.
Yes. Now, it says hanging on a tree, but the impalement is I mean, if you can get the picture, it's not a pretty picture, but this was the same idea, okay? Joshua, the 8th chapter, verse 29, and also the 10th chapter, verse 26. John, you want to read both those for me, please? And then Debbie, I'll let you read 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 12, and 21, verse 12.
8:29.
Yes, 8:29.
And the king of Pales, he hanged on a tree until Eve died, and as soon as the sun was down, Joshua commanded that they should take his carcass down from the tree and cast it at the entering of the gate of the city, and raise thereon a great heap of stones that remain to this day.
Okay, and then turn over to chapter 10 and verse 26.
Afterward, Joshua smote them and slew them and hanged them on 5 trees, and they were hanged upon the trees until evening.
Okay. David, read 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 12 for me.
And David commanded his young men, and they slew them, and cut off their hands and their feet, and hanged them up over the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the scepter of Ebner in Hebron.
And then chapter 21, verse 12.
And David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from the men of Jabesh Gilead, which had stolen them from the street of Beth-shan, where the Philistines had hanged them, when the Philistines had slain Saul in Gilboa.
Now, all of these scriptures basically say hanged on a tree, so I don't know whether they were impaled, but that was a common thing, somehow to make the innards available where the birds and the carrion would have ready access to the flesh to dispose of it, okay? However it was, this treatment was designed to prevent the individual spirit from resting in the afterlife. And that was their thought. Remember now, they're idol worshippers. They're not God-fearing people. Cal, you had a comment?
Well, also, it's a matter of humiliation,
Yes.
people of high station, to treat them this way. And it serves as a warning to all others, don't mess with me. So,
Yeah.
and that's why the Romans crucified. And they used a variety of crosses and different things the way they did it. But it was always a matter of humiliation and as public example, don't mess with us.
Yeah.
What happened.
And just as, go ahead, Isaac.
That's setting an example, well, scare tactic, it's going to scare the daylight out of you.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going to keep you, well, it's going to make you think twice, and
True.
you know what's coming.
Yeah. John?
If they took them down by evening time, that's before they started snowing,
Yeah. Yeah.
so they got them off. covered up and everything.
Yeah. But if you think about-
They had trying to live around there.
Yeah. If you think about everything that all of you have said and everything, I mean, you can even think about Jesus. What did they do with him before they put him on the cross?
Whipped him.
They whipped him. They whipped him to the extent that they ripped the flesh where you could actually see the bones, and it was a terrible way to die, but it was a tactic used to bring fear on the other people that were not being punished this way. And so if they took an individual like this and they impaled them on a tree or hung them on a tree in this way, certainly as people passed by and everything, it would serve as a strong warning to them. So, all right, let's look at verses 20 through 22 then. And let's see, Pat, I guess we're to you.
20 to 23?
20 through
22.
22, yes.
Okay.
Chapter 40.
Thus it came about on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hands with his hand. Did you stop there?
No, verse 22.
But he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them.
Okay, so Joseph's dreams were interpreted correctly. This is capital letter N on your handout, page 103. So what we see here is everything comes to pass just as Joseph had said it would would happen. And the exact fulfillment of the dreams showed that the dreams originated at or in the instigation of God, and the interpretations were also inspired by God. So the celebration was a celebration either for his birthday or his accession of his reign as king. That accession of new kings included the release of prisoners, may give the background of Pharaoh's release of the cupbearer. Okay, that may be part of why he was released. Remember, when Jesus, the Pharaoh asked him, "Who do you want me to release?" So this was a common practice. Yes, John.
Not only released him, though, he restored him to his
He restored him.
former
Yeah, he restored him to
position.
his former position. Yep, absolutely
So
right.
that's a little more than just releasing somebody
Yeah, that's
for
true.
a celebration.
What
That's
was
true.
the former position of this crook that they released? I wouldn't want him to, he probably did go back to his
Yeah.
thieving.
All right, so let's close it out then. Look at verse 23. And Jensen, go ahead and read that for me, please.
Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.
And so our kind deeds are not always rewarded by those who are the recipients of them, is what your outline says, capital letter O on page 103. So this chapter focuses solely on Joseph's rise to power and is fulfilled, chapter 41 is, fulfilled with foreshadowing. But we finish in chapter 40 here with the idea that it is highly unlikely that this was merely a slip of the mind, especially not after everything happened just as Joseph said that it would. Rather, it would seem likely that he intentionally forgot Joseph. Perhaps, though, he had no desire to help Joseph at this point. We're talking about the cupbearer, okay? Because he had asked the cupbearer, "Remember me now." Or perhaps the cupbearer was waiting for a more convenient time. As the verse 14 says, go back and look at it, it says, "But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me, make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house." King James Version says, "when it is well with you," I think, is the way King James words it, okay? As opposed to those seeking a favor immediately after being pardoned, okay? A request that would take more nerve than most men have. Because Joseph is asking the cupbearer to do something here that would take some courage by the cupbearer. And
Especially after he just gained his freedom.
yeah. After getting his freedom and everything and being restored to his position, he's going to be a little reluctant to speak out and say, "Hey, this Joseph back here, he's the one that interpreted this dream." But there's going to come a time, and that's what we're going to see in chapter 41. It focuses solely on Joseph's rise to power and is filled with overshadowing. And so Joseph will get the success of his request, or the acknowledgement of his request, here in chapter 41. Any other? Yes, John.
What's the possibility he didn't want to take the idea, or put the idea in Pharaoh's mind that Pharaoh wasn't in charge of this, that somebody else happened.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to say nothing about it. And also a possibility that he was so glad to be out of prison that he just didn't even think about Joseph.
That's a very, very real possibility as well. So, any other comments on chapter 40? I don't want to get into chapter 41 because I know the second bell is going to ring within the next 30 seconds or a minute. But any other? See, I told you. I'm a prophet and didn't know it.
Joseph's just a good guess.
You said it's gonna ring any time now, man.
Where do we put here?
One.